Gettysburg was a great battle. And after it was all over, a great victory by Meade. But it kept France and England completely out of our war. And France and England, after that battle, said, sorry, Confederates, we will not give you any further ammunition or arms of any kind. You will get no ships with arms on it. You can have the ship, but there will be no military arms on it at all. So it kept them out of our war permanently after that. But then I received a letter from Mr. David Wills, the chairman of the Cemetery Commission at Gettysburg, where those soldiers were being buried. I was asked to make a few appropriate remarks and dedicate the cemetery, the new National Soldiers Cemetery. And I figured, what do I write? How do I do this? Over 62,000 men killed, missing, and wounded. And all there. And over 200,000 troops that fought on that battlefield. I walked part of that battlefield. And you feel all of the things that happened there. You have that. And yes, I wrote those few appropriate remarks over a period of several weeks. And I finally, I wrote little notes, and I put all of those notes together on my desk, and I sat there, and I wrote and rewrote and wrote and rewrote different things. And finally coming to finish writing my few appropriate remarks. Except for a few words at the very end I couldn't quite make. On the 18th of November, I boarded the train and went to Gettysburg, arriving in Gettysburg at about supper time. Went to the Wills house where I was to spend the night as Mr. Wills' guest, and then I went to my room afterwards and I finished those few words I just couldn't put together. They finally were there in my mind. And then I went for a walk. And I first stopped and gave Mr. Seward, my Secretary of State, I gave him my speech, and I said, make any comments you want, or any changes you would like. And I said, I'll be back and pick up my speech after a while. Oh, no, I won't. He said, it's quite all right. I'll drop it by over at your room. No, I won't be there. I'm going for a walk. And I walked out to Culp's Hill and Cemetery Hill, where there was a great artillery battle that took place. And it's next to the old cemetery in Gettysburg. And then after that, I walked across the pike, and there's a great arch that's there, and I walked through that arch into the old cemetery and on down the hill and down into this new military cemetery that I was to dedicate the next morning. I heard a lady's voice, and her voice was very faint. And as I followed that voice, and you have to remember, this is November the 18th, it's cold, it's almost winter time, and the frost is on the ground. And as I followed that voice, all of a sudden I heard the exclamation, I found you. But she had been calling the name Carl. Carl, where are you? And as I followed that voice and I found her, and I went up and I said, Madam, you really shouldn't be out here. You should be back at your inn where you're comfortable. It's cold out here. There's frost already on the ground. And she was rubbing that grave marker where she found her son. And then, not recognizing me, not knowing who I was in that dim light, she told me, you know, sir, it's quite all right. I traveled several days from Susquehanna to be here. You see, my son, Carl, on his 18th birthday, he saw the poster that Abraham Lincoln was asking for more troops, more volunteers. And he volunteered that day, and he went away to camp. And we never saw him again. He wrote letters almost daily, telling us about Army life and how wonderful it was to serve his country and serve President Lincoln. And then he died here at Gettysburg. You know, sir, you should be here tomorrow because President Lincoln is going to be here tomorrow speaking. And I know he will have something to say about why my son died here. And I had to leave. I literally had to walk away from that lady. You can understand how I would feel inside. I have too much compassion for people. And I really didn't need that. But I had it. And I was glad I'd been there for that lady. She never knew. But then that following morning, at 10 o'clock, I went with the procession out to the cemetery. And as we came up on the platform, as I stand here, I listened to a 2-hour oration by Edward Everett. Wonderful oration. He's the greatest in America. And I listened to that, and then it was my turn. My good friend, Ward Hill Lemon, from Springfield, Illinois, an old lawyer friend that we traveled the circuit together. And he was the Marshal of Washington, D.C. now, and my personal bodyguard when he wanted to be. That's why he came to Washington with me. But he had that much thought for me and for my safety. But as I walked up to the platform and to the podium, and I stood there at that podium as I stand before you, looking out at those thousands of graves. 70 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We're met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this, but in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate. We cannot consecrate. We cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note, no long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work, which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be dedicated here to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. This war continued. And on March the 4th of 1865, I took my second oath of office. There wasn't much to say. No speech was really necessary. But I made the comment that somehow all of us, North and South alike, have all come to the conclusion that this war is about slavery at the bottom of it all. That's part of my speech. And then I said, fondly do we hope, fervently do we pray, that this mighty scourge of war shall speedily pass away. Yet, if God wills that it continue, until all the wealth of the bondman's 250 years of unrequited toil shall be sunk, until every drop of blood drawn by the lash shall be paid by another, drawn by the sword. As was said 3,000 years ago, so still it must be said, the judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether, with malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right, as God gives us to see the right. Let us strive on to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who has borne the battle, and his widow and orphan, to do all to achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Ladies and gentlemen, 620,000 men died in the Civil War. 1.4 million were casualties in the Civil War. The Civil War touched every single family, one way or another, somehow, North and South alike, in this war. Yes, and ever since that time, those men died to give us the freedoms that we enjoy today. And ever since then, every service person, male or female, no matter what service, they've all been there, peacetime and wartime, ready to give their life for you and I, so that we keep the freedoms that we've gained in this United States. That's our United States of America, ladies and gentlemen. When you see, young people particularly, I always say, when you see a uniformed serviceman or woman, go up and say, thank you for serving our country. Thank you for keeping us free. And if you see a senior, particularly, someone you know that's a veteran, go up and say thank you for your service to your country and to keep us free in this country. Thank you. And when you do that, you will probably be rewarded, and I say that with tears coming from that veteran, because they were ready to give their life for you. And it's a special moment between you and that veteran then. It's just the two of you. You'll never regret it ever in your life. And when I see a veteran, yes, I'm very happy to say thanks for your service. Because so many of them wear a hat. I'm a Vietnam veteran, Korea, you name it, they're all there. WW2, and we're losing too many of our WW2 people very fast now. I'm at the tail end of WW2. Yeah, I'm that old, and all. But this is what I love to do. I love to remind people, thank our service people for their service to our country and our freedom. That's the United States of America, ladies and gentlemen, that I know and you know. God bless you all, each and every one, and God bless America. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Thank you.